I raised my glass and my voice, and I ended my own wedding before it even began, right there under a chandelier that pretended to be made of starlight in a room full of people who thought they knew me but never bothered to listen. I said the words, as calm as I could, "This wedding is over," and a hush fell like snow over the linen and crystal. Claire stared at me as if the floor had tilted. Her father gripped the microphone like a judge about to deliver a sentence. Her mother hid a smile behind the rim of her glass, and I felt my chest burn, not from shame, not from fear, but from the last thin thread of loyalty to my mother, the woman they had mocked, the woman whose ring they had taken, the woman whose name I would not let them smear. One more second. My name is Adam Stone. I live in Denver. I write home inspections and climb old stairs that complain at every step. I fix faucets. I install smoke alarms. I talk to strangers about the bones of their houses, and most of the time I liked the quiet of my work. I liked it more when I could drive back to my apartment and hear my mother humming to some old Motown track in my head, humming like a metronome that kept my life from slipping off beat. Then the humming stopped, and a year later I met Claire. Claire Whitmore walked into my life with a laugh that made rooms lean toward her. We met at a summer charity picnic the city threw on the riverfront. She was handing out raffle tickets and light teasing jokes. She asked what I did. I said, I looked at the insides of houses and told people what was about to break. She said, a profit of broken pipes. That's useful. I smiled. I said, it pays the rent. She said, I like men who tell the truth. The way she said it, like she was tasting something, not just hearing it. It made my chest feel warm. I had been cold for months. We dated slow at first coffee and strolls through City Park. A rainstorm that glued our shirts to our backs and made us laugh like we were 12. The first time I took her to the mountain, she stood on a ridge and said, the air tastes clean up here like apples. She liked the old things that I liked, diners with counters that still had chrome bookstores that smelled like paper and dust. On Sundays, we would walk past a flower shop that placed buckets along the sidewalk, and she would point, that one, no, that one, and always end up picking daisies. She said, they look like little suns. Simple and honest like you, Adam. The first time I met her parents, I brought daisies. I know daisies, to a house that looked like a magazine. Cover, a glass box of a place on a hill, with steel and stone that said we could hold out against anything. The Whitmores were the kind of people who wear their last name like a brand. Randall smiled in a way that felt like a firm handshake without the warmth. Evelyn kissed the air kind of near my cheek and said she loved my watch. It was my father's watch, the only thing I had left of him. The way she said loved had too many letters, like she was buying it with a compliment. We sat on a couch that frowned if you slouched, and we talked about nothing, which is to say we talked about them. They asked about work, about money, about upward paths. Randall asked if I ever thought about flipping houses the way people ask if you ever thought about joining the circus. Evelyn asked where I saw myself in 5 years, and the true answer next to Claire felt too simple for their ears. I said something about starting my own inspection firm, maybe hiring veterans who needed a steady trade. Evelyn's smile twitched, and she said, that's noble, in a tone that made noble sound like a white flag. Randall poured more wine and said, Denver's market was hot if you knew how to move. Then he asked if I liked red meat, grilled rare, and I said yes. And he said, good. At least we agree on something. I did not know then how deep the history ran between the Whitmores and my mother. I knew the outlines. I thought I knew. My mother's name was Margaret. She had hands that could find a splinter by feel and a voice that sounded like a soft lecture. She worked nights at a hospital billing desk, When I was a kid, she kept a ledger in her head for people's kindnesses, and she believed in paying forward until the ledger was too heavy for one person when I was 16. She helped the Whitmores with a problem. They owned a small event company, then tents and chairs and fairy lights. They had a tax penalty that would have sunk them. My mother had fought tooth and nail to get a small inheritance from her sister, and she could have used it to fix our leaky roof. She used it to keep their business alive. Instead, she said, people need their livelihoods. We can live with buckets for a while. I remember those buckets the roof ticked in the rain. I slept to that sound. She helped them again 2 years later, when Randall broke his wrist and their calendar was full. She took nights off to help Evelyn run checklists. She stood in kitchens reminding chefs when to plate. She loaded vans with strung lights while I did homework by lantern glow. I never saw a thank you card that stuck to a fridge. I heard the words thank you like coins tossed into a fountain the fountain never filled. When my mother got sick, Claire and I had just started. It was a quiet grief, the kind that comes with schedules and lab results. We sat by a window and watched the light change while nurses worked like saints around us. My mother smiled as if she had more hours than the clock would allow. She squeezed my hand and said, keep your promises and do not let anyone tell you who you are after she passed. I kept a small box on the top shelf of my closet, a wooden box that smelled like cedar. Inside the box there was a simple ring, a thin band of gold that had belonged to my grandmother. Then my mother, it was not expensive, not a showpiece, but when I held it, I heard the river of my life, quiet and old. I told myself that one day I would know the right person to give it to. I told myself I would wait until that knowledge felt like a sunrise, not a plan. Claire never met my mother. She met her through me, through the way I talked about Tuesday, soups and handwritten notes left on the counter. And Claire would smile and say, she sounded wonderful. She would also say softly that grief can become a hobby if you let it. I told myself she meant well, that she was trying to pull me toward the future, not scold me for looking back. She wanted a big life. She wanted rooms that gasped when you walked in. She wanted her parents to feel proud. That word, proud, hovered over our plans, like a drone, always humming, always looking down. We got engaged in winter, in a booth at Rosie's, a diner with red stools that never learned to quit. I had a modest ring and a very immodest amount of love in my throat. She said yes, with both hands, to my face, crying and laughing. The whole room clapped and Rosie comped us pie. I thought, this is how a life turns a corner. This is how you build something new without bulldozing the old foundation. Then her mother started planning, and the corner widened into a boulevard lined with costs I could not name. I wanted a small ceremony, something in the Botanical Gardens. Claire wanted the Harrow Club, an old money venue with velvet walls and the kind of staff that moves like ballet. Her parents offered to host the rehearsal dinner there. They said it would be their gift. I said, thank you. And something in me felt a draft, like a window had been left open. I put on a sweater and ignored it. I told myself gratitude was a coat too. The little things started little chips taken out of the paint. Randall made jokes about my job. Good with crawl spaces, he said, you can help. When the marriage foundation settles, Evelyn said, my suit looked earnest, not wrong, just earnest, like she was describing a school project when I mentioned, including a small tribute to my mother during the vows. Claire said, I love you, but I want the ceremony to feel joyful. Too much sadness will make people uncomfortable. I nodded. I said, okay, we can find another way to honor her. And Claire said, of course we will. Then the weeks rolled forward like a heavy cart, and honor became a word we only used when talking about her father's guest list. There was a prenup. I am not naive. I know the function of a contract. I also know the function of respect. The draft arrived in a sleek folder that smelled like money, my name printed in crisp black, my future described in clauses that made my skin itch. There were provisions about lifestyle expectations that read like a syllabus for a class where you had already failed. There was a clause about how I would agree not to speak publicly about family matters, including social media, which was fine. I am not a social media person, but the tone made me feel like an employee. There was a clause about contributions to a shared home that implied my money would be welcome, but my opinions could be audited. I asked Claire if we could revise the language. "Soften the edges," she said. "Lawyers write like that. It doesn't mean anything. My name means something." "You know me, Adam?" I took a breath. I said, "I do. I also know words mean something." She kissed me. She said, "I will talk to them." Then she put it off. Then she forgot. Then she said the venue had a deadline for the final head count. The week of the rehearsal dinner, I came home to find my closet tidy in a way that felt wrong, my shirts aligned, my shoes in a straight row. The cedar box on the top shelf was not where I left it. I took it down my hands already. Cold, I opened the lid. The ring was gone. The indent where it rested looked like a small mouth open in surprise. I called Claire. My voice caught on her name. I asked if she had been in my place. She said yes. She had grabbed a jacket. She left there. I asked about the ring. There was a pause. She said she borrowed it. Her voice tilted upward, on borrowed like it needed help. She said she wanted to wear something of my mother's to the rehearsal to feel connected, to make me feel like she carried Margaret with her. I sat down on the floor, the hangers above me clicking softly. I said, "You did not ask." She said, "I wanted it to be a surprise." I asked where it was. She said, "At her mother's." With the jeweler, my breath became a series of short stares. With the jeweler, I repeated. She said they were making it more secure, adding tiny prongs so it would not slip. Her mother's idea, modernize it a little, not change, it just freshen it. I said, "It is an heirloom. It is not a trend to freshen." She said, I know. I just wanted to do something sweet." I told her to bring it back as it was. She said, "Of course." She said it would be perfect by Friday. She said her father had already arranged the wine pairings. I barely slept. I stood in the shower and tried to find the line between love and boundary. The water thudded like distant applause. I could hear my mother's voice soft. "You keep your promises. You do not let anyone tell you who you are." Friday came, and with it the dinner. The Harrow Club looked like it had been pressed with a hot iron, every corner sharp, every flower arranged not to smell staff gliding chandeliers, throwing light like it cost extra. Almost everyone there was, from Claire's side, cousins with polished smiles. Business people who shook my hand and looked over my shoulder. My father came in a suit that belonged to his brother, his tie, a little crooked, his eyes steady. He squeezed my shoulder. My sister June stood with him, a force of nature in black flats. She said she would leave if anyone said something sideways about Mom. I said, "Do not worry." And I felt like a liar saying it. We took our seats. There were place cards, my name printed in gold, as if gold could make a person feel more welcome. Randall took the mic. With the confidence of a man used to being obeyed by furniture, he thanked everyone. He made a joke about how Claire had always been decisive. She had picked her college in an hour, her career in a day, and an almost decent man in a few months. Laughter like ice, clinking in thin glasses. Evelyn stepped up and called Claire a comet. Her voice thinned with pride. She turned to me and said I was the steady tail behind the fire keeping pace. My father's jaw worked like a machine that needed oil. I stared at the linen knot of my napkin and counted my breaths. Then Randall said he wanted to acknowledge someone absent, and my spine went rigid. He said Margaret Stone had been a presence in my life and perhaps in theirs. He said perhaps, as if he were guessing the weather. He said she had a gift for being involved. He said it like a charm that turned a door handle. A few people tittered. Evelyn leaned into the mic and said Margaret never could stand the wrong fork at a table. She always had advice for how to set things right, she laughed. It was a bright sound that hurt. I felt my face heat. June's hand found my arm under the table. A small anchor, Randall said, but we admire good intentions, and we will honor her spirit tomorrow without letting the tone get too heavy, because weddings are for joy, not sorrow. I looked at Claire. She smiled nervously and touched her hair and mouthed, "It's fine." I swallowed air that tasted like metal. Evelyn added one more flourish. She said Claire would be wearing a piece of history, a lovely little vintage ring with some tweaks to make it safe on a modern hand. She winked at Claire. My chair scraped back an inch without me telling it to. I heard June whisper, "Oh no," and I understood that the ring had been changed, not only borrowed, but bent to fit a taste I did not share. The staff smiled the way staff do when they cannot leave. My father reached for his water glass and missed it. Donna, the club's coordinator, signaled for dessert, mini pavlovas that looked like clouds tamed with sugar. Randall lifted his glass and told the room that marriage is compromise. He said Claire was marrying an honest man, and honesty, as we know, benefits from guidance. The laugh took a second longer to arrive. This time, people were watching my face like it might split. I stood. The chair legs skated back, a sound like a blade on tile. My heart was not pounding. It was steady like feet on a path. I raised my glass and I felt the last thread of something snap. I said the sentence I already told you. This wedding is over. The room froze. The servers held their trays like statues in a museum. Claire stood a fraction of an inch, then sank back. Randall laughed a single syllable, an ugly little cough. Evelyn said, "Adam, be reasonable." I said my mother's name, Margaret, and the air shifted, because I do not say her name. To make a point, I say it to make her present. I told them they did not get to use her to season their jokes. They did not get to touch her ring without asking. They did not get to paint me as grateful just to be here. Claire whispered my name a plea. I looked at her. I said, I had asked for a small, simple thing a moment, to honor the woman who taught me to show up for people. And they had told me it would be too heavy. Then they took the lightest thing. I had a ring, the weight of a dime, and they tried to modernize it so it would be safe around them. I said, I was not safe around them, not anymore, not in a way that would make a life. My voice did not shake, because when the truth finally finds the door, it walks straight through. Randall said I would regret humiliating his family. He said I was emotional. He said I was sabotaging. Evelyn said we could talk tomorrow, that we could undo tonight with a better tomorrow. I said there would be no tomorrow for this. I set my glass down slowly so the sound would not be dramatic. I nodded to my father. I took June's hand. I told Claire. I wished the version of us I had believed in was real. Then I turned and walked out into the hallway with its photographs of men in tuxedos from another century, none of them looking like me. Outside the club, the night was warmer than it had any right to be. My father said,
I am sorry it took so long to say it, but I am proud. June punched my arm like we were kids again, then hugged me so tight I could not breathe. My phone vibrated like a trapped insect, messages stacked. Claire, then Evelyn, then numbers. I did not know. I stood in the glow of a streetlight and watched moths throw themselves blindly at it. It felt like a metaphor before it felt like a fact. I told my father to take June home. I said I needed to return something to myself. I went back in.
Past the coat check, where the attendant looked at me with a kind of sympathy that made me want to cry. I walked to the table like a man returning to a crime he did not commit. I told Claire. I needed the ring now as it was not as it had been. Tailored to be? Evelyn said it was safer. I said that safety was not the point. The point was the line where a person ends and other people's plans begin. Randall said the jeweler could undo the changes. I said the jeweler had never met my mother.
I said I was not negotiating with a memory. Evelyn said, Adam, you are being theatrical, and I said you taught me the stage. I am using it. Claire reached into her small clutch, her hands shaking, and placed the ring in my palm. It looked both familiar and wrong, like a childhood street with a new name. I could see the new prongs, the tiny shine that did not belong. I closed my hand, and for a second I felt the weight of every decision I had made since I said hello at a riverfront.
Claire said she had not meant to hurt me. She said she was trying to honor my mother in a way that would fit our life. I said my mother had taught me that life fits around the things you honor, not the other way around. She asked if there was anything she could do. I said, yes, take care of yourself. Build a life that will not ask you to apologize to anyone for being yourself, and ask permission before you touch what belongs to someone else, even when what belongs to them is invisible. I left. The night held I slept for an hour on my couch, the kind of sleep that is not rest as much as a truce in the morning. There were more messages, soft and sharp, apologies and threats and explanations, and a distant aunt's attempt at scripture. I turned off the sound. I made coffee that tasted like wood smoke. I opened the cedar box and placed the ring back in its indent. The wood seemed to exhale. Later that day, Claire came by. She texted from the street, I will leave if you say so.
I said, come up. We stood in my small living room with the plant that refuses to die. She looked smaller without a room full of allies. She said she did not know how to stand up to her parents. She said she had never learned to say no to them. I believed her. I also believed. I was not the person who could teach her. The classroom would be our house. The grade would be our life. She said she loved me, and I said I loved her. She cried. I did not. I had done my crying the night before.
While standing very still, she asked if there was any version of this where we could still get married. I said, not with the people they were and not with the person. She was around them. She said she could change. I said, I hoped she would, for her own sake, not for mine. She asked if we could at least keep the daisies from Sundays, a small joke that landed like a bird on a railing. I smiled, despite myself. I said, you will always deserve daisies. She nodded. We said goodbye without the drama of movies, which is another way of saying. We said it like real people, quietly, with sentences that end without slamming their doors. The days after were a mix of noise and quiet. The noise from friends, choosing sides. I did not ask them to choose, from co-workers who had heard and wanted to tell me their own stories. The quiet from the evening light on my kitchen counter, from the slow drip of a faucet I had meant to fix, from the ring sleeping upstairs like an old dog that finally found its corner. Randall texted once that I would regret embarrassing his family. I typed and deleted 3 replies before I landed on I regret how long I let you talk. Then I put my phone face down and went for a walk until the sun slung itself behind the mountains. People think the point of a story like this is the moment under the chandelier, the sentence with the weight in it, but that moment is only a hinge. The door had been waiting to swing for months. Little things, little cuts, little laughs that said you are less, little edits to history, little thefts of permission. My mother used to say that disrespect is a slow leak. By the time you notice the stain on the ceiling, the water has been pooling in the dark for a long time. I noticed the stain, and then I followed the pipe to its source. I turned the valve. That is all that happened. It still felt like a small death and a small mercy at the same time. On a Sunday, a few weeks later, June and I took our father to a diner that did not mind our noise. We ordered pancakes that sweated butter and coffee that could take paint off a boat. My father asked if I wanted the old fishing rods from the shed, the ones he and my mother used when dates were cheap and rivers were free. I said yes. He said we should go when the water was low. June said the water was never low in his stories. We laughed, then we fell quiet. And it was a good quiet, the kind that makes room for the next thing. I am telling you all this because there is a version of me in that room at the Harrow Club who stayed seated, who swallowed, who told himself it was only a joke, who let a ring become a population of prongs in order to keep the peace. That version of me is a ghost. I choose not to be haunted by him. I choose to be the man my mother raised, the man who stands up gently and says a clean, hard sentence when the time comes. People will call it dramatic, people will call it impulsive, people will say, I should have waited until the next day, but there is no tomorrow. Where you are a stranger to yourself and things magically improve, there is only the day you return to your name. So that is what I did. I came back to Adam's Stone. I packed the idea of the Whitmores in a box and put it in the basement. I kept the love I had for Claire. Love does not evaporate just because it is done. It becomes something else, a chapter, a weather pattern that moves through and leaves you with a clear sky you did not trust would appear. I kept the ring, I kept the hum of my mother's old songs. I kept the hard lesson that family is not who you marry into, it is who you refuse to betray when laughter tries to make you forget. On some evenings, the light hits the side of my bookshelf and turns the dust into glitter. I sit on the floor with the cedar box open, and I hold the ring between my fingers. I hear my mother say, "Keep your promises," and I realize I kept the biggest one, the promise to myself to be the kind of man who will end a wedding before he will end himself. That promise feels like a quiet room, like a hand on my shoulder, like a road that goes on and on and on. When the daisies are in season again, I buy them without thinking. I put them in a glass by the sink. The sun gets caught in their small white petals. They look like tiny suns, simple and honest, and for the first time in a long time, I feel simple. And honest too. I wash a plate, I turn off the dripping faucet, I hum a song my mother used to love, and I remember that endings can be the cleanest beginnings we ever get if we are brave enough to stand up and say the sentence that sets us free.